September 15th, 2023, 0223, the Black Sea, 180 kilometers from the Russian coast. 3 Ukrainian FP-1 naval drones cut through the darkness at 180 kilometers per hour, skimming just 3 meters above the waves. Their target, a Russian spy ship that had been strangling Ukraine's naval drone operations for 6 weeks. This wasn't just any ship. This was an intelligence-gathering vessel, bristling with R381T electronic surveillance arrays, sophisticated antenna systems capable of intercepting radio signals from hundreds of kilometers away. For 6 weeks, this ship had been logging Ukrainian drone launch patterns, tracking frequencies, mapping routes. Russian analysts were days away from predicting future strikes before they happened. If this ship completed its mission, Ukraine's entire naval drone campaign, the campaign that had been terrorizing the Russian Black Sea Fleet, would be dead in the water. But the Russians had no idea what was coming. Those 3 drones approaching at wave-top height were constructed from plywood, not fiberglass, not composite materials. Plywood, the kind of wood you'd use to build a bookshelf. And that simple material choice was about to make them nearly invisible. Here's something most people don't know about radar. It's designed to detect metal. Specifically, radar works by bouncing radio waves off objects and measuring the reflection. Metal reflects radio waves extremely well. That's why aircraft are so visible on radar. But wood barely reflects radio waves at all. It's mostly air and organic fibers. To a radar system designed to track aluminum aircraft, a plywood drone has a radar cross-section smaller than a seagull. The FP-1 drones exploited this weakness perfectly. Flying low, just 3 meters above the water, they blended into what radar operators call sea clutter. The chaotic radar returns from waves that make it nearly impossible to distinguish small objects. But the Russians weren't relying on radar alone. They had reconnaissance drones overhead and thermal cameras that could detect heat signatures. A Russian 4-post-R reconnaissance drone appeared on the horizon, flying its standard patrol pattern 30 kilometers off the Ukrainian coast. This isn't some cheap commercial quadcopter. The 4-post-R is a sophisticated platform carrying a Canadian-made MX-15D camera system that can spot a basketball from 5 kilometers away. In thermal mode, it can detect temperature differences as small as 2 degrees Celsius. That means it can see the heat from a drone's engine, even if the drone itself is invisible to radar. At 0245, the lead FP-1's engine heat spiked on the 4-post's thermal display. 3 small contacts. Low altitude, heading east at 180 kilometers per hour. The Russian operators zoomed in, trying to classify the targets. Unknown contacts approaching Russian-controlled waters would normally trigger an immediate alert, but the Ukrainian drones had a trick for this too. The FP-1 drone's pre-programmed evasion protocol kicked in immediately. They dropped from 3 meters to just 2 meters above the water, so low their propellers were creating spray. And here's where the plywood construction became brilliant again. Metal holds heat. Even after you turn off an engine, a metal drone stays warm for a long time, showing up bright on thermal cameras. But wood transfers heat rapidly. Within minutes of the engines throttling down slightly, the plywood frames had cooled to match the sea temperature. To the 4-post's thermal camera, the drones simply vanished. One moment they were there, 3 heat signatures moving across the screen. The next moment, nothing but cold ocean. The Russian operator logged the contact as possible birds and continued his patrol. He had no idea he'd just let through the vanguard of an attack that would cripple Russian intelligence operations in the Black Sea. But you won't believe what happened to the Ukrainian launch site just minutes later. Behind those 3 drones, chaos was erupting at the Ukrainian launch site. Russian Shahed drones, Iranian-designed kamikaze UAVs that Russia had been using extensively throughout the war, had found the location. They arrived just minutes after the FP-1s had cleared the area. Ukrainian operators barely escaped as 50-kilogram warheads turned their equipment into scrap metal. Explosions tore through the improvised launch ramps. Fire consumed the support vehicles. If the FP-1s had launched even 5 minutes later, they would have been destroyed on the ground. The mission would have been over before it started. This is the reality of Ukraine's naval drone operations. Every launch is a race against Russian detection. Every mission requires accepting that the launch site will probably be destroyed. Operators set up, launch, and evacuate, knowing they're working against a ticking clock. The spy ship's intelligence network was working, just not fast enough to stop what was already in motion. At 03:30 a.m., while the 3 FP-1 drones were crossing the Black Sea toward their target, 20 Ukrainian naval drones launched from a different location, heading towards Sevastopol at 80 kilometers per hour. But these weren't attack drones. These were decoys. The decoy swarm was a mix of modified jet skis and cheap commercial boats fitted with basic guidance systems. Each one cost less than $10,000. Throwaway assets designed to look exactly like Magura Vi-5 naval drones on radar. They maintained formation. They transmitted the right radio signatures. They moved at attack speed. To Russian radar operators watching their screens, this looked like the largest naval drone assault since October 2022, and the Russians took the bait completely. Making convincing decoys requires more than just sending boats toward a target. The drones had to follow realistic attack patterns. They spread into assault formations, the same formations Ukrainian strike drones had used in previous successful attacks. They converged on likely targets, using approach vectors that matched historical patterns. They even performed evasive maneuvers, zigzagging as if avoiding defensive fire. Ukrainian operators controlled them via satellite link for the first 50 kilometers, then switched them to autopilot. Each drone broadcast on frequencies known to be monitored by Russian intelligence. Some even carried heat sources to mimic the infrared signature of armed drones. The deception had to be perfect, because the goal wasn't just to distract. It was to force Russia to commit their most valuable defensive asset. The Russian admiral commanding Black Sea Fleet operations had 6 Ka-27PL anti-submarine helicopters at Novorossiysk and 4 at Sevastopol. These helicopters are the fleet's primary defense against naval drones. Here's why helicopters matter so much in this fight. Ships are too slow to chase drones. Fighter jets fly too fast and can't hover to search. But helicopters can cover 100 kilometers in 20 minutes, drop RBU-6000 depth charges that neutralize everything within 50 meters, and use dipping sonar to hunt underwater threats. Without helicopter coverage, naval approaches are essentially defenseless. Russian doctrine demanded responding to the visible threat first. All 6 Novorossiysk helicopters launched west at 270 kilometers per hour. Every minute they flew west was another minute. The real drones flew east, unopposed. By the time they realized the deception, they'd be 360 kilometers out of position, and the spy ship sitting 15 miles off Novorossiysk would have no air cover, no quick reaction force, no way to vector helicopters to investigate suspicious contacts. For the next 2 hours, any drone that got past the patrol boats would have a clear shot. The 3 FP-1 drones adjusted course 15 degrees north. This wasn't random. It exploited something Ukrainians had discovered through months of careful observation. The Russians had 2 Podlet K1 radar stations covering this sector. Each radar rotated at exactly 10 revolutions per minute, one complete rotation every 6 seconds. Picture 2 searchlights spinning in circles. For a brief moment every minute, they're both pointing away from the same area. That creates a dark corner, a corridor where nothing is being actively observed. That corridor was just 2 kilometers wide. The drones had to hit it precisely, but the Russians had adapted. They'd started randomizing the radar rotation patterns to eliminate predictable blind spots. The corridor was shrinking, appearing at irregular intervals. The first drone entered at 0447, 4 seconds invisible, 2 seconds visible as one radar swept past, then invisible again. The radar operator saw a brief contact, something small, moving fast, but it disappeared before he could get a solid lock. The second drone followed 30 seconds behind, still on course, still invisible. But the third drone had developed a problem. A microscopic flaw in the third drone's autopilot gyroscope, probably a cheap Chinese component that couldn't handle temperature cycling, caused it to drift right, 200 meters off course and growing. At 0448, Russian operators received new orders. Randomize rotation patterns further. The predictable corridor was collapsing. The third drone corrected hard north, burning precious fuel. It entered the shrinking corridor at 0449. Both radars painted it clearly. Contact, bearing 270 degrees, speed 180 kilometers per hour, altitude 50 meters. The operator had a decision to make. 20 confirmed targets attacking Sevastopol versus one questionable blip that appeared briefly and might just be a bird. He marked it probable bird and returned to tracking the decoy attack. The third drone had made it through, but that emergency maneuver burned 12 minutes of fuel. It would reach the target area with less than 60 seconds of flight time remaining. The patrol boat screen, Russia's last line of defense. The Russian spy ship wasn't sitting alone. 15 miles off Novorossiysk, two Project 03160 patrol boats maintained a protective screen, circling at 5-kilometer radius around it. This was standard doctrine since the loss of the cruiser Moskva. Never leave high-value assets undefended. The spy ship's powerful radar could see threats the patrol boats couldn't, vectoring them toward contacts like a quarterback calling plays. It should have been an effective defense. Should have been. At 0500 a.m., as Russian helicopters closed to engagement range on the decoy swarm, the 20 fake drones performed their final act. They scattered in different directions. Some beached themselves on empty coastline. Others circled in place until their fuel ran out. A few simply stopped moving. None attempted to reach actual targets. Their job was already done. The helicopters spent another hour hunting stragglers, burning fuel, wasting ammunition on drones that cost less than a single depth charge. By the time they headed home, they were 180 kilometers from Novorossiysk with half their fuel gone. The real attack was still coming, and visibility was dropping as morning fog thickened across the Black Sea. 0600 a.m. The lead FP-1 was 240 kilometers from the target when something strange happened. Its GPS position began sliding east. The drone wasn't turning. Reality was being rewritten. The Russians had activated their R330ZH electronic warfare system from Crimea. This isn't crude jamming that just blocks signals. This is sophisticated spoofing, broadcasting fake GPS signals that are stronger than the real satellite signals. Real GPS satellites transmit at about 0.00001 watts. The R330Z broadcasts at 100 watts. It's like trying to hear someone whispering while someone else is shouting in your ear. Russian operators had perfected this trick. They could walk drones toward the ground, or in this case, toward a Panzer air defense battery waiting to shoot them down. But Ukrainian operators had learned too. Every 50 kilometers across the Black Sea, oil platforms dot the water, fixed structures that haven't moved in decades. The FP-1's primitive cameras could spot these platforms from 5 kilometers away, resetting position based on preloaded coordinates. No amount of GPS spoofing can beat visual navigation. The Mark I Mod 0 eyeball, as military folks call it. The lead drone corrected its course using an oil platform as a reference point. GPS said one thing, the camera said another. The drone trusted its eyes. The second drone wasn't so lucky. 0615, hardware failure, the cheap component problem. At 0615, the second drone's GPS receiver died. Not from jamming or spoofing, but from a junky Chinese capacitor that couldn't handle repeated temperatures cycling between the cold night air and the relatively warm sea surface. Without GPS and without the visual acuity to spot distant oil platforms, it switched to inertial navigation, basically dead reckoning, using gyroscopes to track direction and speed. But inertial navigation systems accumulate error. Over water with no reference points, the drift is about 10 meters per minute. After 80 minutes, the drone was 800 meters off course. After 160 minutes, it was 8 kilometers off course, heading for empty ocean instead of the target area. At 0645, it hit the water. No explosion, just gone. 2 drones left. The spy ship goes active. Detection at last. The third drone was 5 kilometers behind the lead, still maintaining course on clean GPS. But that was about to change. The Russian spy ship went active. Its mineral ME radar began painting the western approaches with radio waves, searching for incoming threats. At 0723, they found something. Bearing 285 degrees, speed 180 kilometers per hour, range 15 kilometers. The ship's radar locked on. The lead drone's primitive threat receiver registered the lock, basically a simple device that detects when radar is focused on you. But wood confuses radar designed for metal. The mineral ME's targeting algorithms look for sharp, clean returns from aluminum aircraft. Wood gives mushy, inconsistent returns. The signal keeps fluctuating. The radar kept losing lock, reacquiring, losing it again. The operator reported intermittent contact, possibly birds. Here's where things get interesting. The Russian spy ship was running its R984UM jammers to protect against naval drones. These jammers flood certain frequencies with electronic noise, making it hard for drones to receive commands or navigation signals. But those jammers operate at 20 to 1000 megahertz, right in the middle of the ship's own communication frequencies. Every time the jammers transmitted, they degraded their own radar returns. Russian doctrine has a term for this: electromagnetic fratricide. Your own systems interfering with each other. It's a calculated risk. The manual says the degraded radar performance is worth the protection against command-guided drones. They were about to learn the true cost of that calculation. 0725. The spy ship vectored a patrol boat to investigate the intermittent contacts. The boat accelerated to 35 knots, crew manning the forward PKM machine gun. The gunner loaded a fresh 200-round belt, checked the iron sights, braced against the mount. His loader stood ready with 2 more belts. They'd drilled this hundreds of times. Engage low-flying targets at 500 meters. Walk tracers into the target. Maintain fire until splash. Standard procedure. Investigate. Identify. Engage if hostile. But they'd been briefed for aluminum drones with infrared signatures. Nobody mentioned plywood ghosts flying 3 meters above the waves in heavy fog. The lead drone had 3 minutes of fuel remaining. Behind it, the third drone flew on, invisible because it had shut down all electronics to avoid radar detection, but blind because it was flying on compass, heading alone. Morning fog was now thick enough to cut visibility to 500 meters. 0730. The lead FP-1 reached the target area 15 miles off Novorossiysk. The Russian spy ship sat exactly where Ukrainian intelligence predicted, still vectoring patrol boats toward incoming threats. At 0734, it broke through the haze, just 10 meters above the water, and moving 180 kilometers per hour as the first drone's engine died in a final glide. Russian eyes followed the decoy's fall, missing the real threat. The spy ship's radar, unable to depress below -5 degrees, left it blind to the incoming attack. A lookout saw the third drone at 300 meters, but it was too late. At 0734 a.m., the 25-kilogram warhead struck the mast housing the R381T surveillance antennas. The explosion gutted the bridge, melted the arrays, destroyed the mineral ME radar, and triggered secondary blasts that raged for 18 hours. 6 weeks of intelligence, frequencies, routes, and predictive data gone. The ship could be repaired, but the lost intelligence was irreplaceable. Within hours, Ukrainian drones launched anew with fresh patterns, again invisible to Russian tracking. Moscow's sophisticated radars, patrols, and helicopters, worth tens of millions, were defeated by plywood drones costing a fraction of that. The strike proved that high technology is not invincibility.